Hi, welcome to the School Run. I'm Jane.
And I'm Liv.
And we are going to share with you the best conversations we have on our school run.
We will invite guests and debate topics that affect and resonate with every generation.
We all remember our own school run, so maybe have a think about yours.
What do you remember?
Hello and welcome to another episode of the School Run podcast. It is a privilege to bring you an episode every single week. Liv and I have done over 80 episodes now since February 2023, and we couldn't be more grateful for this journey. I'm joined by my 17-year-old co-host and daughter, Liv. Liv and I had a very long journey to school, an hour and a half there, an hour and a half back. And we just decided to put our great chats onto a podcast platform. We expected my mum to listen, Liv's grandma, but actually 11,000 listeners later. And we're obviously doing something right because people keep coming back to hear more stories. So whilst we share our journeys and our journey through life, we also have amazing guests that come on and help young people and old alike to navigate life, really help them with things that might be going on for them. We share people's journeys and stories from school to where they are now, and how it's okay not to have it all figured out at school, because very few of us do, and life actually takes us on a really interesting journey. Liv, we're here today about to do an episode. I'm going to introduce where we are because we're doing a live episode, filming it on location, shall we say. We're doing a live episode today with our guests in person, which you always love. How are you feeling about this chat?
I do love an in-person episode more than online. I feel like I get to connect with the people a lot better. I'm super excited for this because I think it's going to be really interesting and I think it's going to help a lot of people.
And that's what you're all about, isn't it?
That's what I'm all about.
Liv always says every single week, I just want to help people. Whatever I go into in life, I want to help people. And we're still navigating your journey and what you might go on to follow as your career.
Not sure yet, but you know, what will happen will happen.
Life will unfold. Well, we're joined today by Maria Walters and Melanie Adderley. I hope I've pronounced her surname correctly. Adderley. And today we're at the Brain Collective in Harrogate in North Yorkshire. The Brain Collective. And this is the brainchild, or the founders are Maria and Mel. And they are going to talk to us about the Brain Collective and what found them here in their journey. Thank you so much for joining us.
Welcome. Pleasure to be here. Lovely to be here, Jane and Liv. Very excited too.
Are you excited?
I am. I'm excited because I know what we do is pretty unusual for the UK.
Absolutely. And I was fascinated when I first talked to you. I think it's only right to tell our listeners how we came into contact. And that was through our editor of the podcast, Mike, who we interviewed a few episodes ago. He's a digital marketer. And he said to me, I've met two ladies, Jane, that you and Liv will absolutely love. And I think they will really be fabulous on the podcast because they're helping people every single day. Mel, I know that you're a consultant anaesthetist in your background and now a co-founder of the Brain Collective. What do we need to know about you and your story that got you to starting the Brain Collective here?
Well, obviously I'm a traditional medical doctor on the verge of retiring, having done my time with the NHS. But I came to Neurofeedback in desperation, probably about 15 years ago now, when I was struggling with my son's difficulties, with primarily with epilepsy that was poorly controlled, but also a range of a constellation of developmental difficulties as well. But the driving force was the poorly controlled epilepsy. And the traditional medical model essentially just was offering me more and more medications to try to control that, and it just didn't feel right. So I came across Neurofeedback as part of my quest to help my own son, and we travelled to the States and Canada, and we got dramatic improvement. We're still with the medication, but actually his stabilisation was much improved by adding neurofeedback on as a layer, but also we have got a lot of other benefits with a lot of his other issues as well over time. And because of the gains that we saw as a family, it sort of you want to bring it home to other people. So, we've spent a lot of time training and learning and developing. And, I think, we do our best to do what we can for people for whom, and this isn't everybody, but for whom the traditional approaches don't give the solutions that they're looking for. Good medicine is what works. So, if traditional medical approaches work, that's great, but they don't work for everybody. And sometimes you need to look outside the box.
Absolutely. And just for our listeners who, let's think, a 12-year-old, 15-year-old listening to this, what is the approach? What is neurofeedback?
So all our brains are neuroplastic from the day we're born to the day we die. That means that we have the capacity to learn. So learning a new skill, or learning how to behave, or learning emotional reactions to things. What's actually happening in our brain is that our brains are wiring in certain ways, and that's great because it gives us the capacity to learn. But unfortunately, life's not always easy, and either genetically or as a result of life experiences, we don't react in the our brains get wired in less well functioning ways that cause us problems in our life. And so neurofeedback is based on the premise that our brains are neuroplastic. So if we can learn new skills, if sometimes our learning goes awry and our brain goes into a wrong place, we can, through a feedback technique, help the brain in a non-invasive way to better stabilise, to better regulate, and therefore hopefully to give a longer term improvement in function and happiness in life. And that's essentially what it's about.
It's incredible, isn't it, Liv?
Very, very interesting. I've wondered, why did this start in America? Is that why it's not in the UK as much?
That's a really good question, Liv. The foundations of what we describe as EEG, which is electrocephalogram, which is essentially recording a brainwave, go way back to 1856, a long, long time. And since then, various scientists have been working on how do you record a brain. In 1929, quite a famous guy called Hans Berger was the first person to be able to properly record brainwaves. And the technology really picked up. And when we got into the 50s and 60s, NASA massively took this up as a cause. They strapped people into very fast cars and had EEG caps on the heads of the astronauts to see what happened when you put an astronaut through G-force, essentially, what was happening to a brain. They had the first ever brain database that filled a whole room in their technology park, and they were trying to work out what happened to a brain when you put them in space, what happened to a brain when you catapulted someone. But also they were having tremendous problems with the engineers and the astronauts. They were developing epilepsy. And they couldn't understand why. So they sent out to the NASA research village for anybody who had any animals, because they had a theory that it was the high octane fuel that was causing people to start with epilepsy, essentially. So there was a chap in the village called Barry Sternman, and he'd been experimenting on cats. And he'd put a wire into a cat's brain right into the centre, and he had been rewarding cats with milk flavoured with chicken stock if they made a brain rhythm called SMR. And these cats, they were very clever cats. They learned how to make this SMR rhythm. So Barry said to NASA Village, have my cats so you can experiment them. So they were putting lots of animals into tanks and exposing them to rocket fuel. And Barry's cats didn't die. All the other cats were found dead on the bottom of the crates. And so they went back to Barry and said, well, we just don't understand why your cats didn't die. And he said, that's because I have made them seizure resistant by strengthening a brainwave called SMR. And that is really where it all kicked off. And they spent a lot of money investigating the whole area of EEG and biofeedback. Unfortunately, the space race really slowed down with the new administration, and all those amazing scientists that were in that village were scattered all over the States. But they knew they had something really quite special. And so those people like Barry Sturman, Joe Lubar, and people associated with like Susan and Sigrid Othmer were then scattered around the States, but they continued to keep going because they knew there was something magical in the fact that we can actually change our own brains.
It's incredible. I just find the whole thing fascinating. And as I sit here today, I know we'll go into it a little bit more, but you've invited Liv and I, and you've actually looked at my brain and took a mind map. Is that how you would?
Quantitative EEG, but a brain map.
Yeah, a brain map. And I've seen my brain waves and how that looks on a screen in front of me. And I know that this is an audio podcast, not a visual one, so our listeners won't be able to see things like that. But it's absolutely fascinating what you're now doing in Harrogate in North Yorkshire. Maria, what's your story that brought you to working with your partner Mel now at the Brain Collective, just so that people get a sense of you and your experience?
So similar but different to Melanie. I had my younger son really struggled, and I think he was probably the youngest person in Yorkshire to be put on Ritalin. He was 4 years old and didn't respond that well. Stayed on it for years, really, as parents thinking we're doing the right thing, but no, really wasn't. So really boosted by Melanie's fantastic response with her son. We then followed Melanie out to Canada and had a fantastic result. Found out my son didn't have ADHD at all. He had something quite different, and there's my journey began, really. And so I had to do it. You know, I had a very sad, sick child at the end. And as a parent, you have to do whatever you can because you're only as good as your children.
Mm-hmm.
But it sort of goes a little bit further back for me because my mum had a significant injury in 1957. And back then, the service for trying to deal with that was something called electric shock treatment and some pretty strong drugs that were very addictive. So my mum had a lifetime of really being a prisoner in her own head. And, you know, big cause of mine is I don't want to see that happen to another person if I can help it. So, and I know I could have helped my mum now. My mum died as a young lady, really. So, yeah, all the techniques we use would have been great for her. So I'm doing it for my mum.
Oh, wow, isn't it incredible? Have you got any questions as we get to this point? Because obviously I had my brain looked at today and you sort of went downstairs into the cafe. What are your questions about? Because you saw the brainwaves on the...
I did, very interesting. My question was actually what we were talking about as we were going down to the cafe, about how men actually find it really interesting about what you do, if they struggle to, is it show feelings? And
Oh, absolutely, Liv. I think one of the warmest feeling we get really is people who really struggle to express themselves. And one of the reasons, you know, men's mental health is so difficult is they will not ask for help. A lot of them will not ask for help. And sometimes people get what we call poured into our chair because they've got, you know, dreadful depression or really are not functioning. They have terrible burnout. The great thing for a man, it's a technical thing. We can show based in numbers and based in brainwaves how people are feeling. And that I think a lot of men think they're making it up. A lot of people who come through here think, you know, they just think, oh, it must be all in my head, I'm making it up. And it's not. We have signatures in our brains, things happen to us in life, and they imprint. We're like blotting paper. You know, and our job here is to unstick that blotting paper, really. It's to change that pattern. And some people absolutely need help to change that. We see a lot of people who've been in some pretty awful road traffic accidents or have had strokes or have had different injuries to their brain, and they really struggle to access just talk therapy. They're not regulated enough to be able to do that. So
I think
very important.
The frightening statistic is that the biggest cause of death of men under the age of 35 is suicide, because they won't either acknowledge it in themselves or seek the help that they need. They'll often hide it from their families. And the beauty of this is they don't need to talk, and actually we can just help them re-regulate, provided they've got all the other support that they will. We're not the whole picture, and it's important they have the right support from their medical doctors. But we can be a very helpful approach to shift a brain that is being reluctant, or if the person is reluctant. A lot of men we get here are brought by their wives, and they're often quite reluctant to come. But once we've had a long discussion and a chat and had a discussion about how their brain is running, the majority of them will come round to actually engaging with us. So that's quite pleasing when that happens, because they're often very suspicious of us and not prepared to engage, but because of their wives, they get brought, sort of encouraged to come, and then come of their own volition, which is great.
So I suppose that leads me on to my question, and we've touched that young men may come because they're struggling with their own mental health, emotional regulation, whatever that is, through a traumatic or something they've struggled with the whole way through their lives. Who are the different types of people that come to you? What's the range? Why would someone listening to our podcast today think I might need to go or recommend to one of my friends or family?
Well, pretty much, anybody from birth to death. I mean, the youngest person we probably work with is probably about 3 or 4 years old. That's the youngest we've probably worked with, but all the way through. So age is not really a barrier. There are people who work with babies. We don't have that experience, but there are people. Men, women alike. And really, we do, although on our website we have to put things into categories to help people find us, we're actually not diagnosis is not this is about. This is looking at the individual, and what are their issues. So we will look at a person as a whole. So even if somebody comes to us with anxiety, we still want to know about their sleep, their physical issues, their behavioural issues. All we want to see them as a whole, look at their background, their history, and what we're looking at is identifying where are we seeing the dysregulation in the QEEG and the EEG. Does it, from what we understand about brain through neuroscience at the moment, does it correlate with somebody's individual symptoms? Because we are all individuals. We are all a constellation of our genetics and the experiences of life that we have. And then what the QEEG helps us to do is it helps to give us a guide as to what interventions we think are most likely to help. And if we think it's important to signpost they're not appropriate for us, and to signpost to the traditional medical model or other fields, then we will do that. We will not work with people who we don't think we are appropriate to work with. But it is a way of, okay, let's look at this differently. How might we be able to help you? What are the best things out of the options we have accrued over the years and believe strongly, and what are the best options that will help to change your brain to help it function better and help you live a happier life?
And I know that when I looked at the my brain waves, because that's all I can see just in front of me right now, but you are then looking at my brain waves and against a database of thousands and thousands and thousands of others to look at, I suppose, similarities and where it might be that you fit in a similar category. Am I right to say that? So someone that maybe has been diagnosed with ADHD or autism or depression or schizophrenia or whatever, and then you'd be able to see different patterns and then talk around the physical and mental around that.
Yeah, I mean, there are different presentations for different symptom profiles. It's not one size fits all. So if you talk about ADHD, there are quite a few different presentations on the EEG, and we would not make a diagnosis. Actually, the diagnosis is not important. Just giving somebody a label is not important. It's about, okay, how can we help you? How can we make things change? How can we make life easier? And so it's not, there are profiles that we do see. There are what are called phenotypes that are associated with different characteristics and different difficulties that people might experience. But it's very much individual. We need to make sure that we're looking at that person in that moment with their specific symptoms and look where the dysregulation is in the brain and make sure that it correlates. So yeah, it's not, we're not here to give people a label. I think that's really important we get that across.
Mm-hmm.
People do come to us having had a diagnosis. That's fine, that's not a problem. But we're not here to give a label to somebody. What we're here to do is work out how to help them.
I think most people signpost us really in 4 key areas. One of them is developmental issues. As Melanie said, things like autistic spectrum, ADHD, global developmental delay, tics, Tourette's, things like that. Then we've got all the head injury work we do. We do a lot of work with people who've been in an accident, had a stroke, fallen off a roof. It can be various things, and that's very much a hidden injury. We work with footballers and rugby players who've had some pretty awful injuries as well, to try and rehabilitate them as fast as we can. And then the whole area of mental health. And then the other area we very much work in is just how do we get the best out of someone. So people do come to say, I'd really like to work on my attention. Can you help me do that? I'd really like to work on my sleep. Insomnia is massive. Pretty much everybody we work with in our mental health arena has problems with sleep, either oversleep or dysregulated sleep cycle. And a lot of people, the drugs don't work for them. So that's where I think we come into play. There was a beer advert, wasn't there? It reaches the parts that other beers don't reach.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah. And I suppose with Liv and I have had our own mental health journeys, and I think it's very topical, and there's a huge pandemic on mental health from the very young to the very old, and we're all talking about it more, which is fabulous. But how do we help?
We are different, and in the States and in parts of Europe, there are thousands of us out there, but here it's a handful.
Hi everyone, we hope you're enjoying this episode so far. We're just cutting in to say, if you're enjoying our podcast, please click the follow button on whichever platform you're listening on. And please leave us a review. We'd be so grateful for your support and feedback. Podcasts are free to listen to, but if you are loving our school run chats and debates, please consider buying us a virtual coffee. The link will be in the description of every podcast episode, and it will also be in the bio of our Instagram, which is @theschoolrun_official. And why not give it a follow while you're there, so you can see all the updates and get sneak peeks at upcoming episodes. Thank you so much and happy listening.
So how many in the UK, and are you really in the small minority of clinics that are working in this neuroscience field?
I think there's very few clinics set up like us. We've been set up because we had a necessity to do it for our own families. We do a lot more technology than most clinics do as well. It's very, very costly and labour intensive and academically intensive as well. You get little pockets of people operating in different ways, but to do a proper wraparound service and what we do is actually very expensive. So I think that's one of the reasons, and we're not supported by, for instance, medical insurance in the UK. There's no what they call CSD codes here for doing EEGs, for instance. But in the States, if you go, you can get it on your insurance.
Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, the quantitative the EEG within the medical world is used purely for seizure detection or looking at sleep studies, or if people are in comas looking for what brain activity there is, we're using the EEG in a different way. We're not using the EEG to diagnose those things. We're looking at the EEG as a way of it demonstrating mental state, arousal level. So it's different.
And how do we, if you could wave a magic wand, what would happen within mental health services and within that? I know that's a huge question, but it's a huge topic, isn't it? And it's so important.
But I think everybody needs to understand there's a huge amount we can do to help ourselves. And we live in a very toxic world, and we're not going to change that. We can't just, we live in lots of toxins around. We live in a world that is driven by technology, and our brains are changing as a result of that. I think we need to understand that sometimes you have to look at your lifestyle. So important things like doing the best that you can to get good sleep. So, getting technology out of your room. Your bedroom should be a safe haven. You should have a regular sort of routine for your sleep. Simple things make a difference. People need to look at the food that they're eating. People with diets of heavily processed food, that's not good for our bodies, and it's not good for our brains. We need to look at eating proper, healthy, nutritious food that's not been put through a lot of the processing that our food is. We need to acknowledge that in order to stay fit and healthy, we need to do regular physical exercise. That's important. And we also need to use our brains. We need to use them cognitively. Sort of sitting in front of the TV for hours on end is not good for our brains. So there's a lot that we can do for ourselves to give ourselves the best chance of living a happy, healthy life. That said, things happen in life that mean that that's not the case. But there are lots of technologies out there now that can help, and we use all of these technologies. So we use sound therapy, light therapy, neurofeedback therapy, different forms of neuromodulation therapy, where if a brain is really, really stuck, we can help to just give it a little bit of an extra shove and see if we can help to get it back on that path. So a lot of what we're doing is to try to re-regulate the brain, and this is all very based in neuroscience. This is not, it's not sort of weird and wonderful stuff. So there's a lot of evidence around near-infrared and working on that healthy, health for the mitochondrial function of the brain cells. Using sound, we use a lot of equipment using sound to help to stabilise the autonomic nervous system, which is that part of our nervous system that can go out of kilter and cause fight and flight and panic attacks and things like that. And then neurofeedback, we do our neurofeedback in clinic because we personally we prefer to do that. We prefer to work with people on an individual basis. But there's so much that is out there that isn't a pill that can help you to regulate your brain, calm you down, stabilize the brain, and move it to a point of optimal function. It's about trying to get your brain to be the best that it can be. We're not all going to be perfect. That's not reality. But anything we do is essentially peak performance training, whether or not somebody's got a problem and wants to get it better, or actually they just want to stay happy and healthy. We all train ourselves regularly in this clinic. I want to do the best to stay as healthy as I can for as long as I can. And that's the most important. It's not just about living a long time, it's living well for as long as you can.
Right, I just have a question about, like you said, it's a very technology heavy world that we're living in now, and especially my generation. I mean, some of my friends, we did a poll at my high school about your screen time, and my friends were 12 hours, and I thought, how is that even possible? Like, you're supposed to be sleeping and being at school. Like, how are you on your phone for 12 hours? So are there any effects that you can see from technology, and what are they, and how bad are they?
Yeah, there is a superb book called I Minds from a lady called Mary Swingle, about looking at the damage, the impact of technology. But we are now in a situation where we basically just take bites of information. People don't sit down and read a book from start to finish anymore. They don't spend time just being, they're constantly scrolling. And that is making it very much more difficult. Our brains are unlearning how to pay attention. So you are almost creating what you would class as an ADHD profile, because you are just literally using little snippets rather than actually sitting down and focusing and concentrating. The other profoundly damaging thing with technology is the damaging effect it's having on new babies and children, because you see mums on phones looking at their phones and not interacting with their babies. So that is having a profound impact upon their neurological development. And I think we're seeing a lot more issues in school with children who haven't gone through the normal developmental sort of trajectory that they should. And again, more issues with attention. And often, in order to feel safe, a child needs that face-to-face, all those non-verbal skills, how they learn to speak, so critical. So I think that it's very damaging for us as individuals, but I think it's also very damaging for mums and fathers of new babies. Those new babies need you. They don't need you paying attention to your phone.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because you can just almost go down the high street and you see mums pushing prams on the phone, whereas a generation ago we'd have been looking over the pram, interacting, singing, jiggling things,
talking to them,
singing, playing games.
One of the saddest experiences I think I've had in a long time was going to a restaurant, and I saw a mum and dad and two children, and the mum and dad were sitting scrolling on their phones, and their children asked the waitress for paper and crayons. So there was no interaction with that family, but the children actually knew, they didn't have a phone, they just wanted to draw. But mum and dad there was no conversation at that table. We're social animals, we know in terms of cognitive decline, for instance, they did a massive study in civil service study, and they looked at people who'd retired, and it didn't matter whether you were the janitor sweeping the floor or the chief executive. Within 6 months, people had lost massive amounts of cognitive capacity, and that's because they had lost the social connection. Social connection is everything. An amazing book, if you only ever read one book in your life, is a book called The Good Life, and it's an 80-year study on what makes us happy, based out in Boston, and it's still going on. They've had 4 study directors, but it's an incredible book, and it really is quite interesting because they took 2 populations of people. They took quite privileged people that were undergrads at Harvard, and then they took inner city kids in Boston. And they physically monitored them, they emotionally monitored them, and they stayed with them that entire life. And then started monitoring their families. And it is it's the data that came out of that. I'm not going to tell you any more because I think you should read the book.
The Good Life. We all need to read The Good Life. We really do. Maria, what was your background? I know obviously your personal story with your son, but from school to the Brain Collective, what was your background here?
I absolutely loved school. I found it really hard because when I went to school in the 70s, they didn't understand why I couldn't read. And it's now called dyslexia. They thought I was quite verbally, quite fluent, they couldn't pin it all together. And I really struggled. I couldn't read when I went to high school, which was a bit of a problem, really. And I certainly couldn't spell. So I made it through high school because I was desperate to go to university, absolutely desperate. And everybody laughed at me when I said I was going to university. They said, how on earth are you going to go to university? Because you can't, you struggle to read and write. But I did it in the end. I picked the sciences, and by God, I used to work very, very hard. I ended up going to university. I did a science degree, became a chemist, ended up in industry, which was a phenomenal job. I absolutely loved it. And always did sort of technical jobs really, and lots of jobs with people and trying to get the best out of people. I then ran a consulting firm, which was a nationwide consulting firm, and had 2 amazing kids, married to a surgeon. So that was, lots of juggling. And then running at the age of about 4, when my younger son was 4, started to think that there was some problems I needed to attend to. And I have to say that's probably the hardest job I've ever done in my life, being a mum. Try and do the best, and no doubt I haven't done it very well on some points, but you do try.
We can only ever do our best at the time with the knowledge and what we've got available to us, haven't we? But you obviously went all out and really did help and do your best.
And you know what, Jane, my mum inspired me, because my mum was sort of a prisoner in her own home, and she couldn't get on a train, she couldn't buy a train ticket, she couldn't do the job I did. I felt it was an absolute privilege. Even if it was 5 o'clock in the morning going to London, I'd sit there and go, how lucky am I? I can do this. I can go out and I can stand in front of lots of people and run big companies. And I had an amazing life. And what we do here is our chance to give back, which is why we exist. We're a foundation, really, not a company.
Mm-hmm. You're making such a huge impact and difference on people's lives.
Absolutely.
It is quite phenomenal. And Mel, what was your, obviously, consultant anaesthetist, what was the journey like for you? I guess typically in terms of A-levels, university and into medicine, but was it as straightforward as line as that?
Yeah, pretty much so. I knew very early on I wanted to do anaesthesia. It's been a phenomenal career. I've absolutely loved it. It's been quite hard juggling here, and I've been part-time there and part-time here. It's completely, it's interesting because anaesthesia is about, and intensive care is about maintaining normal physiology and homeostasis, and so there is a feedback loop in it which sort of parallels very much. It's just in a completely different way, I think it's interesting because life had relatively been all straightforward until I had my son's, and his difficulties. I think it's made me a better person because I've had to, you become much more a much more rounded person, and things aren't always easy, things aren't always straightforward. It felt like it was a bit of a curveball, but he's done well. He's, we still have some, there are still, he's not, he still has some academic challenges, but he's a happy, healthy adult. And it's been very rewarding. And I think, it's been a privilege to do this as well. And I can't wait to just do this on its just all the time.
Absolutely, rather than the other job as well. Because that's only because I've seen Liv go under on anaesthetic twice, once at the end of January and once just about, how many weeks ago? 3 weeks ago?
3 weeks ago, yeah.
And it's a huge responsibility. I went in as a mum, obviously, with her. And they're putting her to sleep, and you come away and putting all my trust in you to look after my girl. It's a huge responsibility, isn't it?
It is. And it's similarly. They're both challenging jobs, but in very different ways. Here we're often dealing with people quite often who are in a desperate place, and so that's very challenging. And sometimes you have to help them navigate that. And we very much talk about, we walk on a journey with people. This is not a magic wand. It's not, it takes time to get the brain to function better. So we have to walk that journey with people, and there are bumps in the road. It's not always.
It's not linear.
It's not linear. Absolutely. I think both have been very rewarding jobs in different ways. But yeah.
And like you say, it's not going to be for everyone that comes through the doors here. There's going to be so many factors, and you helping them navigate all of those collectively together.
Yeah. And for some people, we're not the solution. It has to be the right thing for the right person. And it is really important for us that whoever we work with, they want to be here. Because if they don't want to be here, then, we need to have a very positive therapeutic relationship with either the person or the child and the parent, and that adds an extra layer when you're having to, you're working with a family, and all the challenges that are going on in life alongside doing the work with us. Everybody's got school and work and pressures of
family
home
and
family,
elderly parents and all the other things that come with that.
I think the other thing is, going back to the whole school thing, every day is a school day in here, because every day we see a different individual with a different brain, and you have to work so hard to make sure you're doing the best you possibly can by that brain and that individual. And we're very well connected around the world with all of our technology and with all the advice we get. And if we're confused by something, we reach out and we will talk to a machine manufacturer, we will talk to a psychologist based in California. It's our responsibility to do that. So every day is a school day.
And you care so much, both of you care so much. I can see that inside. And I think, there's absolutely not a cookie cutter approach to this. There's a brain in front of me that I'm looking at here, but every brain is completely unique. Every person is unique, and looking at that individual person to improve whatever it is they come through the door needing help with. It's a very personal thing.
And I think a lot of places have become quite good at measuring stuff or just treating stuff. But I think we're very special. We do the measure, but we're trying to resolve as well.
And going the extra mile to get that resolution. Have there been some standout, I know you can't talk about individual people, but have there been some standout successes that you really stand out for you as huge ones that you think, wow, yes?
Some of the head injury clients we deal with are really struggling. They might have had many, many sessions with charities like Headway, and they are really struggling physically, emotionally, cognitively. It's pretty incredible to work with someone and a few sessions in for them to say, or for their families to say, that they've become easier to live with. They've become like themselves, like they were before. The big problem with head injury is they do not feel like themselves. It's almost like they're looking at someone different. And that's extremely rewarding. Getting someone who is almost in like a post-amnesic sort of way in the chair and waking them up is pretty incredible as well. Getting a child who can't access education. We saw a lot of problems through COVID, children going to school and just not being able to attend school anymore. And being able to turn that around is a bit of a gift. It's a lovely thing to be able to do.
It absolutely is. I'm wondering what's going through your mind as we're chatting away.
I just think I feel like it's so different. I do A-level biology. We've done absolutely nothing on the brain. Like, absolutely nothing. So sitting here, it's like I'm in a biology lesson, but better, because it's really interesting. And how it's not just like, obviously, like you said, this might not be the thing for some people. But I think it's not just like, I guess when in mental health, if you go to maybe therapy something and they're diagnosing you with something, for me, I guess I like, to see the facts and to see, maybe the data to like back it up as evidence. And I feel like this is that it's not just saying to someone, I'm going to diagnose you with depression after just speaking to them. And that makes sense in my head because it's actually showing you like what is going on in your actual brain, which I find very fascinating.
I mean, talking to people is really important. Getting a profile for what are their difficulties and their background. What the EEG and the QEEG do is just give us an extra layer of information, and I think that's actually very helpful for people to understand themselves. If you can show them their EEG and show them their brain maps, it as Maria said earlier, it makes them realise they're not just imagining what they're experiencing; it's real. You see a broken leg. You don't necessarily see
broken brain.
Brain.
No.
And we are, there is so much. I think for me, going back to the, what are the really rewarding ones, people who have significant traumas in their life, and there are lots of people who have had traumas from young childhood, and we know about adverse childhood experiences, and the younger you are, the more regular those negative experiences are, the more likely you are to get both physical and mental health problems in later years. And there is so much that we can do to help to regulate that and to help to get some resolution for those traumas using a range of different therapies. Psychologists and psychotherapists may be very useful, as if people are seeing them, that's great. We're really keen that they continue to go on that journey, but this adds another layer, and can often help to unlock it, to enable them to access more with their psychotherapists or psychologists or psychiatrists. I think it just opens up the brain to so much more. But I think trauma is a really big one that I think we can make a big difference with. So with the physical trauma, there's the emotional trauma, and it's lovely working with the children who have neurodevelopmental difficulties and trying to make life. I think we've got so much wrong with our early years, and we need to trying to get 4-year-olds to sit down at a table and read and write. They're too little. They need to be playing and singing and communicating and socialising and drawing and painting and all of that. Their brains aren't ready to learn till they're about 7. We're forcing them through this sausage machine that's way too soon. We're missing out. Which when we're working with a brain or working with a person who has a brain, we will always address the emotional side of things before we address. So if somebody's got attention issues, we will always address the emotional side of stuff before moving on to the attentional stuff, because actually by addressing that, you'll often release a lot of that attentional issue. So I just wish the government and the powers that be would rethink our early years, and they need to be nurtured, and
lots of play, lots of creativity, and music and drama, then you come to the things that our brain is that powerhouse of the whole body, the connection to the physical, the mind, seeing the brain like you would, I don't know, an X-ray of your leg, so it's the powerhouse, isn't it? And what we're putting in there. So if we're taking away cooking from the curriculum, for example, and children are ordering off Deliveroo and Uber Eats and other range of companies out there, but they don't understand how to boil an egg or make some wonderful food from the land that's seasonal. We've really got to rethink.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think so many teachers are under so much pressure. I think they need to be given the space to do their job properly rather than constantly battling.
A lot of our staff members are ex-teachers who just felt they couldn't do the job anymore because they weren't doing the job anymore, and they make amazing therapists here. We have a sports scientist working here. We see a lot of rugby players, football players, cricketers who perhaps struggle after a head injury or just want to do a bit better or want to keep an eye on things. So a huge range of people, just sometimes baselining their brains, but often really, really helping them.
Absolutely. You're doing phenomenal work, and I feel like we've got 2 or 3 other episodes inside here at some point to talk deeper about some of the areas of the brain. But I wondered who's been because we always ask typical questions on the Schoolroom podcast, who's been a point of inspiration, a teacher or mentor for you throughout your life?
My absolute hero was my dad. So my dad was an orphan. He was born in 1929. His mum died of TB. He looked after his mother as she was dying, and went to sea at 14, essentially to make a living. Phenomenal self-starter, and when my mum got ill way back in 1957, my dad was mum, dad, housekeeper, he was everything. So motivated, really, really inspirational guy. He ended up being very, very senior in industry, and I sat and watched this from being a very small child. And one thing you could never say to my dad is, I can't do that, because he just wouldn't put up with that.
He'd find a way.
He was quite tough. But he never gave me an excuse to say I couldn't do something. I was absolutely brought up to believe I could do anything.
How phenomenal. What about yourself, Mel? Who would be a teacher or mentor who's inspired you through your career?
Well, I suppose the problem is there's two separate careers. I would probably won't talk. There are people who have inspired me through my medical career. But in terms of this field, I think what I find amazing is that, so we do a lot of work with the Othmas. Sue and Siegfried. Sue sadly died last year, but we're still in connection with Siegfried, and we still engage a lot, with the Othma. We use the Othma technique, quite consistently. And Nick Douglas, who's the founder of Neurofield, and a lot of the other, people in this field have come to this field because of personal reasons, and they have pushed and invested, and they have been, they have fought against traditional ways, and they, the Othmas, they've been going 30, 40 years. They've been bankrupt on several occasions, but they've kept going because they knew that this was the right thing. And people who are prepared to invest their time and their own money in developing new technologies. We haven't developed any of this. We have the fortune of knowing these people personally and having worked alongside them and understanding their journey. And I think, never give up. There's, if there's a problem, there's always a solution. May not be, you won't necessarily get, perfect, but there's always a way.
But you've got to be determined.
But you have to be determined, yeah. If you're going to make a difference, you have to be determined, And we've, over the years here, we've had lots of people who have poo-pooed us and doubted us, and said we don't know what we're talking about, or it's a load of rubbish, and that's fine. But we know it's not. We wouldn't still be here when we set this company up. We did not know. We didn't anticipate still being here a year later. Here we are, 12 years later, at least, probably a bit more, with 4 staff. And, I don't think either of us would have anticipated that. And it's not been an easy journey, and lots of challenges along the way, lots of learning. But the only way we will get better is if we keep trying. So,
and keep spreading the word, getting that message out there, that there is another way, and that actually it's not just a last resort, because I'm assuming or making an assumption for most people this is a last resort, a desperation.
Absolutely, yeah. And that's sad, but as we keep saying, not, if medication is right for somebody, that's fine. If psychological counselling gives you the solution, that's fine, and they all have their place. But I do think at the moment we are very much last chance saloon for a lot of people. Not everybody. I think more people are coming to us because they've heard of us, but it's just a different way of doing things.
Absolutely. So if somebody's listening to this episode and they think this might help me, this might help my husband, my child, my parent, whatever, how do they get in touch with you, Maria?
I think the easiest way is just to go on the internet and Google the Brain Collective, and we'll pop up. Our website will pop up, and our homepage is pretty simple. It's got a contact me page button. Just send us a message. We spend hours and hours talking on the phone to people. We're really interested to see if that's a case that we can help, and that's absolutely free and for nothing. We're just more than happy to give that gift to people, to have that chat. And if it's not right for them or they're not right for us, we'll just say so. But it's not to be scared of doing it. It's not scary, this. Just reach out to us, talk to us.
Absolutely. So look for the Brain Collective. I know that they also have a podcast which is out there called the Brain Collective, so you can listen to that on Apple and Spotify. And we always finish our school run podcasts with a school run memory.
Yeah.
And so I think we'll start with you, Mel. Have you got a school run memory? Maybe
Yes.
with your own child or your own school run?
I have a very clear one.
Oh, go on, share away.
I remember being a teenager and not doing a piece of homework that I should have done, and on the journey to school with my father, who was a bank manager and quite, old-fashioned strict, and me bursting into tears because I was a bit of a goody two shoes at school, but I don't know why I'd not done this homework. But I couldn't. The thought, as I got close to school, the thought of getting to school and not having my homework to hand in was overwhelming. So I burst into tears, and I felt like, what on earth? And yes, I told him, and he said, you silly girl, how could you be so stupid? Anyway, he took me to the station because I went to school a bit of a way, and he put me on the train. I was probably about 14 or 15, so he put me on the train and said, go home, do your homework. I said, well, what about school? He said, I'll phone them up. Don't you ever do this again. And I never did.
Oh, wow.
He bailed me out, but I learned my lesson, and I never, ever didn't meet a deadline after that.
Whoa, that's a fantastic school run memory, and I've not heard one like it before.
My father had a stare. He only needed to look at me, and I
knew
I had stepped out of line.
What about you, Maria?
I didn't have a school run. I walked to school, as a lot of people did in the 70s, because I'm very old. I walked to school from the age of 5 on my own, a couple of miles over some major roads. And I used to come home at lunchtime to check on my mum. So I was a very young carer, really. But, never thought anything about it, Jo. Just did it. Was quite happy to. I think school knew. And there used to be a lollipop lady in the middle, and one day the lollipop lady wasn't there. I think she might have been sick, and I got run over.
Oh no!
Crossing the road, fortunately I could walk, so I ran away, and I ran to school. I was absolutely black and blue. School asked me what had happened, and I said I'd fallen over, and I went home, and I never told my parents because I knew it was going to be too stressful for them, because they had no choice. I had to walk to school because nobody could take me to school. So that was a pretty
hair-raising school run.
Yeah, I was about 6, I think, when that happened.
So young. I mean, we just wouldn't have our children walking to school at 5 and 6, would we? I think you were 11 when I let you go.
Jane, what it does for me is I was really independent. I could make a meal, could clean the house, and I used to walk to school, and I used to dream about what would happen in 2 years and 5 years and 10 years and what I was going to look like as an adult.
Wow.
And that did me the world of good, really. I had that thinking time, and that was, pretty early planning.
It really was. Well, we've never had 2 school run memories shared like that, so they'll go down in the history books of school run memories. I want to just take this time to thank you both so kindly. We've been here since 1 o'clock today. It's now 4:30. I've had the most incredible experience personally, seeing my brain, my white fluffy brain, and the different parts of it. Thank you so much. This is an incredible experience. I know that it's not it's an investment, quite seriously, and obviously insurance companies don't back that in the UK, etc. So, but I do think it's hugely valuable for individuals, and I would highly recommend anyone to get in touch if they've heard today and think, oh, this could be for me. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to another episode of the School Run podcast. We absolutely love doing the podcast. Podcasts are free to listen to, but if you'd like to buy us a virtual coffee, we'd be really, really grateful. You just need to go to www.buymeacoffee.com/theschoolrun. That's buymeacoffee.com/theschoolrun. You can also follow us on Instagram @theschoolrun_official or TikTok with the same name. at theschoolrun_official. And we always really appreciate your reviews and feedback. On the platform that you're listening to, you can review our podcast and give us a star rating. We'd love to have your comments and receive your feedback. Thank you so much for being a massive support of our journey.